Hello, it's Emma from Movius Makes. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make my screen printed tote bags. Specifically today I'll be working on one where a cat is coloring a coloring page and then the tote bag will say, "Don't bother me, I'm coloring." I wanted to make this one specifically for when you need some type of storage to put your coloring things in and your coloring books, especially if you're taking them elsewhere, like to go color in a park or when you're on a picnic. And I also really wanted this just for my own self, so let's get started. First things first, I'm going to share with you a list of supplies that you'll need if you want to follow along and do this as well. And how I'm going to be screen printing is I'm actually going to be cutting out some vinyl on my Cricut to use as kind of a guide on the screen printing frame itself so that it is reusable and it's not a permanent design that's going to have to be on the screen printing screen all the time. And so I'll show you what supplies you need for that. So first off, you need some vinyl. Doesn't matter what color or anything, it's literally just going to be what you use for kind of the design. In particular, you need to make sure that you get the removable temporary vinyl. You don't want to get the permanent vinyl because I imagine that it would get stuck to your frame and you'd have a hard time pulling that off. So it does need to be the temporary removable vinyl. I just bought this from Michael's for super cheap. I just got the cheapest one I could find, and obviously it's this really gross color because it doesn't matter what color it is. And then you're also going to need transfer tape, which I too got this from Michael's for really cheap, and there's definitely a reason why it was super cheap because it smells really, really bad. It is just absolutely atrocious. Of course, with screen printing, you're going to need the screen printing frame. This is mine, and yes, I'm aware it is super dirty and it looks absolutely awful, but trust me, I have cleaned this. I have scrubbed it and tried to clean it as well as I can, and it doesn't affect the ink and how it works through the screen. It just looks really bad, and that's my bad because when you do this, you do need to make sure that after you're done doing it, you wash it immediately before the ink sets, or else you'll get a really nasty stained frame like this one, just because I was lazy about a year ago and didn't clean it off. So sorry about that, but I also am not going to buy a new frame because this one works perfectly fine. It's just ugly. And then with the screen printing frame, I bought a pack, like a little set. It also came with this little scraper thing to scrape the ink. And then of course a must-have for screen printing is the ink. Today I'm going to be using the black because my tote bags are like a cream color, which I will show you right now. These are the tote bags that I bought. I just bought them off of Amazon, I think a pack of 25 or something like that. I just want them to be this color because the idea behind the screen printing design that I'm putting on there is that you can color it in yourself either with paint markers, acrylic markers, fabric paint, or maybe even alcohol markers. After I screen print it on there, I'm planning to experiment to kind of see what works best, but that'll be later in the video. Some other random things that you'll need for this process is masking tape, which you will see why in the future. You also need parchment paper cut into squares like this. That's because you're going to put them inside of the tote bag to make sure the ink doesn't seep through to the other side. You'll probably need a little weeding tool like this to, weed the vinyl once you get it all cut out, because you'll need to weed out the parts where the ink needs to go through. Obviously, for the bigger things, you'll need a Cricut. I have the Cricut Maker 3. You also need some sticky mats for your Cricut as well, obviously, so it can do its job. And I already have my vinyl on here ready to go. You'll also need to set the ink once you get it on your fabric. In my case, the tote bags. What I use for that is my Cricut heat press. If you don't have a heat press, you just can do it with an iron. So you will need that later on. So for my design, I used Procreate. Basically, you just want to make sure that you use a thick colored black line. I used the monoline brush that's built into Procreate because it's very smooth and has smooth edges. And then you just want to make sure it's pretty thick because the Cricut really struggles if it's super detailed, and then it will also make it a lot harder to kind of like weed out the really small pieces that you're going to need to weed out before you put it on the screen printing screen. Here's my design uploaded into the Cricut design space just as a single layer. You're going to make sure that you mirror it, and then you want to cut it using the vinyl setting, and I always like to apply more pressure. Cricut is finished, it is time to start weeding out your design. So you're going to be pulling out all of the parts of the vinyl that was cut that you want the ink to be going through. The letters in this case were super easy to pull off, but once I got to the bigger design, since everything is connected, it gets a little bit more complicated, and you need to make sure that you work very, very slowly. And I like to also use my scissors and cut it off so that I can work in smaller chunks at a time instead of trying to pull all of it off all at once. You just have to make sure that you're being patient, take your time, and go slow. Now it is time to apply your transfer tape. I had to cut mine into a nice square. I find it easiest to apply if I just peel off the little corner and stick it down, and then I use my squeegee to push the rest of it on. And now it is time to peel off the back of the vinyl so that the sticky part is now exposed. And then you're going to put that sticky part down on the back of your screen printing frame. Make sure that you smooth it down using a squeegee so that it's nice and stuck on there, because then you're going to be pulling off that transfer tape. And again, you need to go extremely slow during this process. Now you're going to take the masking tape and you're going to cover up all the rest of the parts of the screen that are still exposed and not covered with that vinyl, because you don't want the ink bleeding through any of those other parts. And it's finally time to screen print. Make sure that you put some parchment paper inside of your tote bag so the ink doesn't seep to the other side. If you want to be super perfectionist, you could also iron the tote bag to make sure there's no wrinkles. And then after you place your screen where you want it, you're gonna gob the ink up at the top of the screen. I just used a spoon for that. And then you're going to take the squeegee and you're going to start at the top and keep it at a 60-degree angle and pull down. And you can do that a couple of times, but do not go up. You're only going to push it down. My ink missed some spots, so what I did was I just dipped my paintbrush into some of the ink and then painted it on. And then scrape the extra ink back into the jar. Okay, so I finished screen printing my design on my tote bag, and this one's going to be mine because I did mess it up a little, if you probably saw that. So this is what it looks like, and when I put the design on the screen printing frame, I didn't realize that I actually made the design a little bit too big, so part of it was missing, so I actually just painted on with the ink some of the parts that were missing. But this is just going to be my tote bag, and then for all the others that I'm going to actually sell, I'm going to redo the vinyl and make it the right size so that it actually fits on there perfectly, because I don't want to be painting it on every time. And now, since I've put the ink on, it's pretty thick, and so I'm going to need to wait for a while for it to dry. I don't know how long it says to wait. Let me see. It doesn't say. So either you need to wait, I think, a couple of hours for it to dry before you can press it with the heat press, or you can use a heat gun and you can use that to kind of like speed along the process. For me, I'm just going to wait because I have some other things that I can work on. So I'm just going to leave this here and then I'll come back in a couple hours. Also wanted to mention, this is super important and something that I didn't do in the past, which I explained earlier in this video. Please, right after you're finished screen printing and you're not going to be using the design anymore, you need to clean this immediately, or else the ink is going to get stuck on here and just ruin your frame. And I did that last year and now it just looks terrible. This part is honestly the worst because you have to peel off all of these tiny little pieces of the vinyl, and it's like sticky and gooey from the ink because the ink that you use for this is super thick. You just wash it with soap. I just use dish soap and just kind of scrub it off with my hands, and then sometimes I'll use a sponge to get it nice and clean, and then you just leave it to dry and that's it. So it's pretty easy, but please, please, please make sure that you do it before the ink dries. Like, do it right away. Yeah, do not make my mistake. Well, this concludes my screen printing a tote bag tutorial. Here's the finished product. I am very happy with it. It's super cute, and I might have went a little overboard with the coloring. It doesn't need to be quite so detailed, but it was a lot of fun, and the alcohol markers actually did work super well, and they just like seeped right in there. I do want to mention, if you do color with alcohol markers, make sure you put something inside of the tote bag. I put the parchment paper so that it doesn't bleed through to the other side. But yeah, I think it's very cute. I'm very happy with it, and I'm going to be making some more, and I'll be putting them up on my shop. So if you're interested in purchasing one for yourself, the link will be in the description of this video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will try to get back to you. Bye!